Hey, Jeff, and give me your honest opinion. What did you think of the prequel Star Wars films, episodes 1, 2, and 3?
Episodes 1, 2, and 3. It's like we're talking Jar Jar Binks. We're talking
Right.
little baby
I thought
Anakin.
we might not even mention that name, but we've already gone too far.
But
All
it's
right.
already out there. I've already
Yeah.
said it. I don't think I'm going to come in as hard as probably some people might.
Interesting.
When those movies came out, I was pretty young, so
Okay.
they were it came out in what 1998 or something. The Phantom Menace.
The Phantom Menace came in 99.
99. So I was like approaching teenagerhood, but I was still very much a kid. So I think I had a lot of fun with them. I thought it spoke to me a little bit more as sort of that in that sort of age range.
Makes sense.
That said, I do recall distinctly the shift from things feeling real to things feeling very computer generated. Like you could sense that it was almost nothing felt quite as, I think, authentic. And I think I even picked up on that as a child. I was like, oh, this is different. This is a different kind of Star Wars than sort of the episodes 4, 5, and 6, which were, to me, just felt a little bit more authentic. But, broadly, I thought they were, sort of a fun romp. I think actually, I was reading this not too long ago. I think the Phantom Menace has sort of had maybe a little bit of a resurgence in popularity amongst sort of like
true?
people who maybe once really hated it, and now it's sort of getting a little bit more. Maybe it's getting its due a little bit more.
Interesting. I hadn't caught wind of that. I mean, among my generation who watched Star Wars, episode 4, the original Star Wars 1977 in the theater, I'm not sure there's a ton of folks in that camp, but there might be.
It felt like those, at least the first movie. I guess maybe the second and third are a little bit more mature, but it really did feel like the first movie was targeting a very different demographic, which was probably people my age at the time, people between like the ages of 7 and 12.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's interesting. I have kids, right? And so at some point I realized I have to show my kids Star Wars, right? And they got in, they were still pretty young, but old enough to watch those movies. And then I realized that I had to figure out what order to show them the films in.
Oh, no.
Right? Because this is something, I guess I'm enough of a Star Wars person that I thought about this for a while.
Right.
And actually one of the decisions I made is that I went to Movie Madness, which is a fantastic movie rental place in Portland where we live. And I got the original versions of the trilogy, not the ones that were redone.
Right.
So, Han shot first, not Greedo, this kind of stuff. And the CGI stuff wasn't in there. And I wanted to show them the Star Wars that I had seen. So I made that decision. And then I decided to show it in release order, which was the order that I saw them in.
So 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3, and then
7, 8, 9. So that's what I want to do. And the little twist on that was that I showed them the original release versions of 4, 5, and 6 instead of the rejiggered ones.
Yeah.
Now, some people apparently, you have the option of showing them in order of episode order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I was having an interesting conversation with, I'm going to call out my good friend Chris down in San Francisco, who used to work for LucasArts making video games, right? So he's a fantastic designer, and he knows more about Star Wars than just about anybody else I know. And I asked him, I said, and Chris has children, I said, how are you going to, they're a little bit younger than mine, how are you going to introduce Star Wars to your children? He said, well, I'm going to use the machete order. Have you heard of this?
No. What's the machete order?
The machete order, right? So
never heard of this.
This will be news to some people, but people who are hardcore Star Wars people to be like, yeah, we know about this. But I didn't know about it, so that shows kind of where I fall here. And so apparently, there's somebody named Rod Hilton who has a blog, who's a programmer and who came up with this order. And it's different from either release or episode order. And at the time that he came up with this, there was no 7, 8, 9 yet.
Okay.
So the idea is, let me see if I have this correct because I don't want to mess it up. is to watch them in the following order. Watch episode 4, watch episode 5, and then go back to 2, 3, and then skip ahead to 6.
Okay.
And then 7, 8, 9, I guess would be after that.
When and just ignore 1 altogether.
Ignore 1 altogether. Now the reasoning for this is, it's, if you go to his blog, it's still up, and it will explain that, it's irrelevant. He says, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you don't really have to see it. And then he lists some of the things that get removed if you skip episode 1, and you virtually get no Jar Jar, because he's got 5 lines or so in episode 2, none in episode 3. So you skip that whole debacle all over the place. There's no midi-chlorian conversation or anything like that. Jake Lloyd, who's the little Anakin, isn't part of that. The whole Padme Queen switch thing that happens gets skipped. And, there's a few other things as well. And the other thing is that you don't want to ruin what happens in The Empire Strikes Back, which is you find out that, spoiler alert, Darth Vader is Luke's father, right? And so that preserves that surprise if you watch it this way as well. And then if you're watching the reconfigured, remastered ones, at the end of episode 6, in the original, they showed Yoda and Obi-Wan like as sort of ghost-like things hanging out like outside the Ewok village, sort of nodding and like approving everything that just went on. But when they redid it, they put Anakin in there, but like Hayden Christensen Anakin.
Right.
So that would also kind of ruin things. I don't know if you watched episode 6 before you went back to 2 and 3 or something like that. So anyways, this is
interesting.
I think kind of a hardcore way of doing this, and it completely eliminates, importantly, episode 1, I guess. So for people who are, taking it that seriously, that's the machete order.
There it is. The machete order. Fascinating. I'll have to try that one day.
Well, we are here to discuss the geography of Star Wars. And, we spent the first episode talking in quite a lot of detail, sort of setting up the film and talking a little bit about Lucas, talking a lot about episode 4 in particular and 5. So New Hope, Empire Strikes Back. And now we're going to go through the rest. And that won't take as much time because there's less to say, it turns out.
I mean, we're going to start off with Return of the Jedi.
Right.
But even that one, I think a lot more was taking place in space, on spaceships, on these things that are there's just no way for them to have some sort of a geographic location.
Right. Like none of that was shot in space. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
One of the things that happens in episode 6 is the return to Tatooine, however, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because that's important. And I remember seeing this, and I was a teenager at this time, and saw this in the theater, and that whole first sequence with Jabba and then the way they escape and everything like that. And I thought it was fantastic at the time. Right. I still think it's good.
Iconic scene.
Yeah. And so, they go back to shoot some things in location in Tunisia. I think, do I have this correct? It looks like, I think we've reviewed some of this stuff before, and I can't remember if I have that correct now all of a sudden. It looks like a lot of this stuff was shot, actually, some of the Tatooine stuff was shot in Death Valley, actually, now that I think about it.
Oh, interesting.
So you have the Tatooine Dune scene, Buttercup Valley. This is, 10 miles from the Arizona border here. And this is the site that was used for the Sarlacc pit, where Jabba takes Luke and Han and Chewie and tries to dispose of them. And that doesn't work out so well for Jabba. And then there is 20 Mule Team Canyon, Death Valley, California. And this is the Tatooine road to Jabba's palace, where R2 and C-3PO walk up to Jabba's palace. So it looks like it was really that footage is all from California, from Death Valley in this case.
Okay.
It's episodes 1 and 2 that we'll get to in a little bit, where they go back to Tunisia.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
I should have had that sorted out a little bit better. Anyways, the other location that is interesting for us to talk about from episode 6 is Endor.
Yeah, well, that was going to be the one that's, to me, there's that beginning scene in the desert. It's very iconic. But to me, when you say Return of the Jedi, my mind immediately jumps to the forest.
Right.
That's the iconic. It is to episode 3 or episode Return of Jedi as Hoth and Tatooine are to episodes 4 and 5.
The distinctive planet location, perhaps.
Totally.
And this is shot largely in Del Norte County, California, which is Redwoods National State Parks in Northern California, pretty close to the Oregon border, just to get an Oregon reference in there somehow.
There it is.
And it reaches from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Oregon. There is footage of this area that's used in E.T. and Jurassic Park: The Lost World as well. The reason that it's pronounced Del Norte and not Del Norte, apparently, is because this area was colonized by Azorean Portuguese. And so the way that you would pronounce what's spelled Norte in Portuguese is Norte and not Norte. So apparently that's what's going on there. The forests contain giant coastal redwoods. Some of them are over 350 feet tall. And this is, where the Ewoks live.
Right. And so
the Ewoks, a little foreshadowing to what was going to happen in the prequels, maybe a little bit. But.
Yeah. Well, and I'm imagining, or going back to, I guess, episode 4, when they were filming in Tatooine, they were using all of these iconic architecture from sort of Islamic cultures and ancient sort of cultures as well.
In pre-Islamic culture, yep.
It feels like maybe just knowing that this is now sort of in Northern California in the Redwoods, they're probably not able to lean on that as much, or maybe not at all. And so they probably had to do a lot more of their own construction out there for some of these buildings.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, and they were looking for, when they have this Ewok sort of situation, that's, nothing that they're going to go find some ancient civilization that had, Ewok type, like tree huts or anything.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I saw a note that some of the Endor scenes may have been shot in Marin County as well. Marin County is where Skywalker Ranch and everything is. I wasn't able to confirm that. Most of it was shot in Del Norte County, California. That lends, it's maybe not surprising, because it if you've been to this part of the world, to this part of the country, you might be able to pick that out, I think.
So what you're telling me is that at the start of filming Return of the Jedi, there was not a historic weather event that trapped them in a location.
That's right. Unlike the first 2 episodes, they managed to escape, the 100-year storm or the 50-year rainfall.
They're like, should we shoot this up in Alaska this year?
Right.
No, let's just go a little farther north into California.
That's right. Yeah, that seemed like that was probably a good move in the end. So, this kind of concludes the original trilogy, and we're going to get into. We won't be doing the machete order here. We will be talking about episode 1, The Phantom Menace, 1999. And one of the reasons is because it's the return to Tatooine, which, as we talked about, is if there's a planet that is Star Wars, it's maybe Tatooine, right?
Right.
And there are some locations here that are all sort of close together in Tunisia that were used for filming in The Phantom Menace. The Mos Espa spaceport is shot in the Shat El Garsa salt flat in Tunisia. The abandoned set apparently remains there today.
Oh, cool.
So people go, it's become, a place where people go and check it out. I guess the prequel crew spent about 5 months at this particular location, because there's all these other locations about to mention that are nearby that served as the various places for shooting Tatooine, The Phantom Menace. The moisture evaporators you can go visit. They don't actually harvest, moisture or anything like that, if that's what they do. There is the slave backyards where we first encounter Anakin Skywalker. And this is the dunes south of Chat El Garsa and the salt flat of Tunisia. This is also where the outskirts of Mos Espa, which is, the city where we get into the pod racing and everything happens. The first lightsaber duel ever filmed on location instead of in a studio was filmed in this location. So that's distinctive for that.
Was that the one where like Darth Maul is coming and Qui-Gon Jinn
that's
fights
exactly
a little bit?
The one.
Okay.
Yep. The Mos Espa marketplace and pod race circuit in the dune areas around there as well. The grand arena, grandstand, the pit area, the starting grid, the viewing platform. All that was constructed by the crew beginning in May of 1997. And then again in August 2000, when episode 2, when there's some scenes from episode 2 that I believe are there as well.
I think what I'm picking up here, and maybe this sort of flies in the face with sort of when you asked me my first question, the question for today's episode about, what do I think about these episodes? And I sort of leaned heavily on the fact, well, this kind of felt like this was the time where everything was just CGI.
Right.
And so I'm actually kind of surprised by how much they did still film sort of on location. I would have assumed all of this was just in front of a green screen, to be honest.
Yeah. So I guess for Tatooine, they wanted to, there was enough commitment to making it coherent with Tatooine from the earlier film, right? From the original film,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
that they decided to do that. As we mentioned, episode 6 seems like it's mostly Death Valley. There's an area here in Tunisia called the Ong Jamel, which is which means camel's neck in Arabic. So there's a rock formation outcropping that looks like a camel's neck, although that part is not in the film. And this is where Kunjong and Padme land on Tatooine. This is where Darth Maul lands. So this is that landscape. And then I guess the slave quarters was shot in a couple different locations. So there's Emazir. There's the Emazir fortified granary village from the 19th century. So again, this is the group that predates the Arabs in Tunisia, and the Tsar Omar Sia in Tunisia, in the Medellin city center. This is where Anakin leaves his mother, and she tells him to go and not look back. So that's shot on location as well. The slave quarters and the backyards and street are in Zar Hadada, in and around Tatooine. And when I say Tatooine, I mean Tatooine, Tunisia, like the actual Tatooine.
The actual Tatooine, the real
only
Tatooine.
Star Wars filming that actually happened in the actual region of Tatooine. The area was scouted for episode 4, but not used in episode 4. So they kept that in their back pocket, and they came and returned to that for this particular film. And that's Tatooine for the Phantom Menace. There's a couple other places in the Phantom Menace I want to mention. There's the Naboo Royal Palace, the interior. The exterior, I believe, is all CGI. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, if that was not CGI, I would book a plane to that place.
Yeah, right now. Although the
very
interior
majestic
is looking pretty good, right? This is the Palace of Caserta in Italy. It dates back to the 18th century. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this is used again in episode 2. And then there's the Naboo Forest as well. And this was shot in Whippin Woods, which is in Watford, England.
Okay.
And this is, to bring you back, this is where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan meet Jar Jar Binks for the first time. So
yeah, that's interesting to me just because I kind of assumed, at least I'm trying to remember, I guess it's been a little while since I've seen that movie, but that jungly area or a wooded area felt more jungly to me than like, a forest that I would more associate with, England or the British Islands of some capacity.
Well,
so
apparently that's where it happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they've embellished that with some other footage of their own creation, but Watford, England is where the Naboo Forest is, apparently.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously, they didn't film, underwater for those scenes or anything like that.
No, those were not filmed underwater. No,
that's all CGI.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and talk more about some of these prequel films and then 7, 8, 9 after that. So we'll be right back. And we're back. It's the Geography is Everything podcast. Geography is Star Wars is what we're talking about here. We're moving on to talking about episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which was released in the year 2002. And the Naboo Lakeside, the location where Padme and Anakin get married, is the villa.
That scene. Oh.
What's that?
Sorry, there's like this whole aspect of episode 2 or Attack of the Clones that I think it is that almost. I know episode 1 gets a lot of, negativity, but there's a few scenes in episode 2 that even to this day, just like really just, it's like kind of cringy. It's like this whole like love scene between Anakin and Princess Leia. No, not Princess Leia. Her mother. What's her name?
Padme.
Padme.
Amidala.
Amidala. Yeah. And it's just, I can see this scene and I can just feel my my shoulders like bunching up, like, oh.
Sorry, I was distracted by your story there a little bit. I appreciate your comments 100%. And I'm pretty sure that you're not the only one in listener land who, who feels the same way. There's also the city of Theed in Naboo, where Padme and Anakin have several conversations. This is in the Plaza de España of Seville. So, the Mediterranean culture is lending itself to Naboo pretty strongly here. But interiors, right? Like you said before, the exteriors are shot someplace else.
Which you still feel that, right? I mean, definitely now that I'm thinking back to sort of the interiors of sort of the palace, when we were talking about before the break here, that feels very Mediterranean. It feels very, Italian, Spanish, maybe even, I could even see it, had you said Greece or something like that, I would have been like, oh yeah, okay. I see that architecture. I see the cultural influences here and the ones that are at play.
Right. So that's, they went to the European part of Mediterranean to capture Naboo. Let's move on to episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, filmed in 2005. Alderaan, right?
Okay.
And that is, the city itself is all CGI, which is no surprise to anybody, right? Because there's no place like that on Earth. However, the background scenery, the mountain scenery in the background is from Grindelwald, Switzerland.
Okay.
Which maybe isn't surprising either, right? It kind of looks like the Alps, very beautiful area. So that area fills in for Alderaan. Of course, there are no actors that are there. In fact, I don't believe actors were involved in any location shooting for episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. That was only used for background stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, that all makes sense as I'm sort of like digging deep here into my brain. I guess it's been a while since I've seen these movies. For some reason, I have far more memories of episode 1 than I do of episode 2 or 3.
It was so traumatic for most of us to watch episode 1, maybe. I don't know if that's what it is.
Maybe. But for episode 3, I'm trying to remember some of the places that they visit that could have potentially have been real. And I guess, they go to Alderaan, which is a place that is sort of iconized by the Alps, the Appalachian, or not the Appalachians, the Swiss Alps. Yep. And then they go to Kashyyyk. I'm trying to remember where that is inside the movie.
Isn't it in the middle, sort of?
But what does it look like? What is like? I'm trying to remember what's that scene?
It's like Yoda goes and he is like recruiting the Wookiees to be part of the whole battle, right?
Yeah, sorry, my Star Wars knowledge is not nearly as deep, but okay, now I remember. It's like the Wookiee planet.
It's the Wookiee planet, right?
Okay,
it's where Chewbacca's from,
right? Okay, so it's like kind of like there's like a jungle. Okay,
right.
This is all making more sense.
So again, the footage that is used as the background for Kashyyyk is from Phang Nga Bay in Thailand.
Okay,
and there's some very dramatic limestone karst mountains. And, some of them, there's some formations that are coming from the water in the bay. And this adds to its distinctiveness. It's part of the Ophang National Park. And yeah, this is the Wookiee homeland. If they were to have filmed this in, the 70s or the 80s, they might have actually tried to film part of it on location or something like that. But there's no actors there, right? This is aerial footage. Mostly that's used, and it's used as background.
Yeah, and now that we've said that, I can kind of now see the scene. And it's like it's a war scene, right? It's like
right,
like they're flying over, and you can sort of see what that bay looks like, and you sort of see like these tanks coming through the water, and fighting happening, everything like that. Obviously, all of the tanks and everything. There was no actual damage done to.
Right, there was nothing. There was no damage done to Thailand, which we can't say for all filming. Well, right, because if you remember, there's the film with Leonardo DiCaprio called The Beach, where they went to a Thai beach and then they created their own version of the beach that they wanted, and that didn't really set well because they created quite a lot of environmental damage by doing that. Yeah, I
hadn't heard about that. I mean, I'm vaguely familiar with the movie, but I hadn't heard about that. But I think I
don't think I've seen the movie, but I remember reading about that.
Yeah. I've heard similar things from other films, and we can even talk about sort of the things that the Star Wars movies have left there, over in Tunisia, for example. Like these aren't natural things. And while they've sort of become more of cultural touch points, and sort of tourist hotspots because of these films, there's also the argument to be made that, well, this is just garbage that these people left behind,
I think that there's probably a lot of arguments that if a film crew goes in someplace, it should be like the same aesthetic, the same directive when you're hiking, which is leave no trace. You don't throw your garbage there. You don't tread upon certain areas. You stick to the established trails, because if everybody went wherever they wanted and did whatever they wanted, it would trash the place, right?
Right.
So in most cases they're in studios, right? So that's not an issue. And in most places they're not leaving sets or anything behind, but there are some examples of that. And I think there probably have been some controversies around that. The other piece of episode 3 I want to talk about is Mustafar, right? And so this is the battle, right? Where Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker are having their lightsaber duel. And it turned out. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna. I mean, I'm sort of flabbergasted that there's any sort of real part of this scene at all.
Well, they didn't bring the actors out there like in a lava field to act things out. However, Mount Etna in Sicily, Italy, was erupting during the filming of this movie, and so they went out and they got a bunch of footage from the explosion and the flowing lava. And they use that as the background for the lightsaber duel. So the footage of the volcano erupting was added as those background scenes on Mustafar. And of course, everything else was done in a studio, but you were getting actual footage of Mount Etna erupting as background for part of this movie.
So that is really cool. I didn't know that there was an actual volcano erupting during this time, that they could sort of grab this image from. Again, I think there's two sort of thoughts coming to my head right now. It's that one, the first is that with episode 1, I think I expected that to be almost entirely filmed in un-CGI locations, everything. Like, I think that was sort of maybe the popular misconception at the time, was that everything, like, this is like, they just basically threw a green screen behind everything and just shot it on that.
Yeah, no, as we're learning, there's a few locations where actors were in this prequel series, but most of the footage that they grabbed serves as background. Right.
Yeah, and then it seems like as they, episode 1 actually had quite a bit of actual filming, even as background, but still a lot more like, actual not computer generated imagery. And it does feel like as you had episode 2 and episode 3, it becomes a lot more CGI, right? We've run through episodes 2 and 3 in half the time it took us to get through Tatooine in episode 4.
But I'll also cop to a certain amount of nostalgia factor with the first two films and like digging deeper into stories and things like that. But the truth is they did spend a lot more time on, on location, and actors were involved and crews were there for weeks. So it is different. And that, that's probably not the bulk of the critique of the prequels, but it adds to it a little bit, which is that it feels different and the locations feel different. They feel more artificial in a lot of ways. And there's not as much, Earth standing in as other planets.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I guess with that, let's go ahead and take another quick ad break, and we'll sort of wrap up this episode.
We'll come back and we'll wrap up our episode with episode 7, 8, and 9.
All right, here we go.
And we're back. It's the Geography is Everything podcast. We're doing Geography is Star Wars. We're talking about filming locations, and we've worked our way up to the final 3 films. Like the first 3 films, most of this stuff is done in studios on sound stages, but there's some exceptions to that. And there's one big exception to that I want to spend a little time on, and that is Luke's refuge.
Yeah. Very iconic.
Octu,
well,
yep.
Yeah, kind of iconic, I guess.
That's right. Because it figures mostly in episode 8, right? It figures mostly in The Last Jedi, but at the end of The Force Awakens, and then there's part in The Rise of Skywalker as well, where you see this place, this location.
Yeah, it's an island, or it looks like an island.
It is.
Yep. Okay, so it's an island, very rocky, sort of like, very stark contrast, right? It's almost like a pillar rising out of the ocean, and just sort of like this kind of inhospitable sort of land. And apparently, inside Star Wars, at least, there's these cute little creatures that sort of run around, which probably don't exist.
Well, that's true. Although, as we're about to learn, that's related to something that does exist.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool. All right.
All right. So the location for Luke's refuge on Octu is Skellig Michael, also known as Great Skellig, which is a small island off the coast of Ireland, the southwestern coast of Ireland. And so it's a very rocky island.
Yeah.
This is where Rey meets Luke, as we talked about, and it's the site of her Jedi training. There is a ruins of a Gaelic monastery that dates between the 6th and 8th century, which ran through approximately the early 13th century on this island. So this would have been, monks who are, isolating themselves from the rest of society in a very hard place to get to. It's hard to get to now,
right?
With motorboats. So, getting there in the 6th and 8th century would have been challenging, right? Because there's not a dock, there's not a natural bay or anything like that. And even if it's sort of really fair conditions on the coast of Ireland, the conditions around Skellig Michael can be really poor.
Yeah, really and not to compare it to sort of Oregon too much, but I see the rocky cliffs of sort of the Oregon coast. There's a lot of pictures on that, and you can just see how sort of violent that water crashes up against the rocks, and just how hard that must be to navigate. And so knowing sort of what this island kind of looks like, the Skellig Michael, what it kind of looks like just from the films, it's very impressive one that anybody was able to build anything on that island at all, let alone back in, would you say, the 6th century?
Yeah, well, they estimate between the 6th and 8th century is when this was established. Mm-hmm. So whether it was the 6th or the 8th century, I'm guessing the technology was more or less the same at the time.
Right.
And that would have been challenging. This is a site that you can visit today. You can only visit during certain months of the year. And part of that has to do with conditions, and part of it has to do with respecting the needs for the nesting for different birds there. Now, you mentioned the porgs, right? Which are these creatures that Chewbacca sort of has an interesting interaction with. And these are modeled after the puffins that are on the island, that are actually on the island of Skellig Michael.
Very cool. Very cool. I didn't realize that they were actually modeled after real.
Yeah, so there are puffins who are there. UNESCO designated this area as a World Heritage Site in 1996. And there, so if you want to visit, you have to take a boat from the mainland and you go over there, and you might get there and you might have to turn around, right? Because they might get there and you might find out that it's too dangerous. There's nothing established there in terms of nothing to buy. There's no restrooms. There's nothing there. And there's no like railings, right? There's no
Right.
They don't even allow children under the age of 12 to go there because it's just dangerous to be on the island, basically.
Right.
Having said that, it is a popular destination because people know it from the film and or from the films, and they want to check it out. So apparently, when I first started doing the research, I was like, oh, this is where they filmed this at Skellig Michael. And then I learned that there were a number of other locations in Ireland that were used for the filming of Luke's Refuge that were not on that island. And there are a couple of reasons for that. I think one is because it is difficult to access. I mean, you can imagine bringing a film crew there and all the equipment and everything and how challenging that was. Again, there's not a proper dock to easily, moor and bring all this heavy equipment and stuff. But I did find an article in the Irish Times, and again, this is me reporting what I read, that there were some concerns. Now, let me back up for a second, that the Irish Tourism Board was really on board with this, and they had officials there, and there's a picture with I think it was J.J. Abrams, the director, and I think that's correct, and whoever this person was. And so, this is already, they're looking ahead to promote tourism in Ireland through the filming that's happening here. But the Irish Times reported that there were some concerns that the film crew breached some of the restrictions that were established for filming there. And that related to environmental concerns related to the breeding of the seabirds. There may have been some incursions in some other areas and some damage to some of the areas otherwise. And so I think that at one point some restrictions were placed on what could be filmed there. And so I found out that for some scenes for episodes 7 and 8 in particular, and maybe 9, aerial footage mostly for episode 9, that there were some other locations, Sybil Head and Dunmore Head in Dingle Peninsula in County Kerry, Brow Head and Crookhaven in County Cork, Loop Head in County Clare, and Malin Head on the Inishowen Peninsula on the north coast of Ireland. So most of this is in the southeastern part of Ireland, but in the last example there, Malin Head, is in the north coast of Ireland. And so, like the scene where Luke is fishing, for example, that didn't happen on Skellig Michael. I think where they're filming, where he's bringing the Red 5, the X-wing, up from the water. And a huge throwback to the Empire Strikes Back. Right. He struggled so much to do that before, and then proving that he was like full metal Jedi by being able to just lift this out of the ocean. And that Let's Go Ireland website has information about each of these locations and where the crew stayed, and you can stay there too. And there's a YouTube video of Mark Hamill trying to pull a pint of Guinness at one of the places. They have like information about where the crew had their wrap parties for that particular part of the episode. So I don't know. Have you ever been to Ireland before?
Yeah, I've been to Dublin, which I really loved. I really enjoyed it. So I've sort of been inside that area of, I guess that would be northeastern-ish of the Republic of Ireland anyways. But that's about it. I really, really want to go to Cork. That's, for some reason, it's been calling my name recently.
Yes.
Go to that more southern area.
Very cool.
I've heard it's the sunniest place in Ireland.
It's still very much not Ireland that sunny there. In the summer of 93.
Really?
And I was with some fantastic people there. We had a great time. The weather was pretty decent most of the time, although I do remember like trying to dry clothes. Like we stayed at a hostel, tried to dry clothes in the rain, basically. And I remember being in Dingle, which is a fantastic place, Galway. And see, there's some of the places that I visited. And I haven't been back since, but I found it to be fantastic. Very friendly people. So didn't mean to single out Ireland among all these locations as a place to go visit. But since we've both been there, I thought it was interesting to talk about.
What I think is really interesting just in talking about Luke's refuge, and especially when we're talking about sort of the Gaelic monastery and the ruins, it seemed like the production crew, and this is now post Disney, right? Disney has now acquired Lucasfilm. And I don't know how much of a hand George Lucas really had inside these 7, 8, 9 movies.
I think not much.
Not much.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of feels like they've attempted to go back to sort of episode 4 and actually earth truth a little bit of some of their scenery, right? They're actually using historic sites to sort of paint this picture of like these very old buildings rather than just trying to cobble something together in some way through CGI. And
it's maybe not an accident that it's the part that involves Luke, right? Because he's the character that bridges. There's a few other characters, right? Like there's Chewbacca, there's R2, there's C-3PO, but Luke really, and Leia and Han a little bit, but Luke is this central character that bridges everything together. So to have that character on location maybe speaks to what you're talking about as well, and trying to dig back into the way that it used to be done. There are a few other areas that I think mostly involved film crews filming things for background kind of stuff. It's not clear to me how many actors were on location, if any at all, but there's in episode 7, The Force Awakens, there's Starkiller Base, which is, the planet that replaces basically the Death Star, built from the remains of the planet. And it's this sort of frozen surface here that is from the Krafla volcano in Iceland. So that is where some of that footage comes from for Starkiller Base. It's a location that was also used in Thor, The Dark World, Prometheus, and Game of Thrones as well. I think it was used more extensively in Game of Thrones. There is Jakku, which is Rey's home planet, which is a desert, not unlike Tatooine. In this case, I think there was actors actually on location, now that I think about it, because the film crew spent about 6 months there. This was filmed in the United Arab Emirates, in the Rub al Khali Desert.
So it's different plan. They probably wanted a different desert feel, and it does look a little bit different from Tatooine.
It does, right? And so they didn't want to repeat that exactly. The desert spans into Saudi Arabia and Oman, but the part where the footage that's used and the locations that are used for filming were in the United Arab Emirates as well. There is the forests of Takodana, which is where Rey and Kylo Ren and also BB-8 meet for the first time. This is in Puzzlewood, which is in Gloucestershire, England.
Oh, okay.
So that footage is there. If we jump ahead to episode 8, The Last Jedi, the distinctive landscape that I always associate with this film is Crate, right? And this is the area where there's these salt flat, and then it's red underneath, right? And so this was filmed in the Salar de Uyuni, Bolivia, and I don't know the extent to which it was used as backdrop or there was stuff on location there. This is the refuge of the Resistance. There's a scene that plots Luke and Kylo Ren, and it's a very dramatic scene, cinematography from a cinematic perspective. So anyways, there's some real world, there's probably a lot added there as well, but there are some images from Bolivia that were used there from that particular salt flat.
I'm guessing so I'm just remembering that scene there's like those speeder kind of vehicles, and they're like picking up the salt, and underneath is like the bright red sort of also spraying up. I'm guessing that the bright red is not real for this
I
location.
think that we can. I think that's the case. Yeah. I don't think that's.
I mean, it'd be pretty cool if it was, but
right?
that seemed very otherworldly.
Right. Absolutely. And the other thing that we can point to from The Last Jedi, where there was a little bit of on location work with actors as well, is Canto Bight, which is the city on Kotanica, where Finn and Rose are in this city that's got casinos all over the place. And they're looking for the master code breaker. This was another filming site for the Game of Thrones, and this is in Dubrovnik, Croatia.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like I've heard Dubrovnik, Croatia. One, I've heard it's beautiful. I've also heard that it's a pretty popular spot for filming locations across a wide variety of.
No, I think that's true. And I didn't. I mentioned Game of Thrones, but I think that you could find a list of films that were using this particular location. And for The Rise of Skywalker, almost all of it was done in studio. I mean, there might be a few exceptions to that where there is a little bit of footage from Jordan and maybe from Dubrovnik again. I'm not exactly sure. But, when by the time we get to this film, this is CGI for the most part.
Right.
And this is also a film that's come in for, this is not the geography part, but for some criticism with, how it all ends. And,
Yeah. I mean, well, one, like, I'm trying to remember The Rise of Skywalker, and, there's some pretty iconic scenes, right? There's the sort of ocean scene where Rey and Kylo Ren are fighting, right? Obviously they can't be on a real place for that. Yeah. So I think that tracks, it's not a Star Wars podcast, but yeah, I mean, I think the main criticism I would have over this trilogy as compared to even like the first trilogy the prequels and then the original trilogy is that it didn't seem like they had a cohesive vision all the way through for what the story was going to be. Right?
They shifted directors, right?
Yeah.
And the directors had very distinct ideas about what they wanted to do. And there's sort of a little bit of a lack of faithfulness to the whole universe of sequences that happens there. And that, that they had to bring the Emperor back felt like,
I know.
I mean, was there nothing else they could have done there?
Well, they spent we're not a Star Wars podcast, but we're already in it. So whatever. We could spend a few minutes riffing on this. They built up this one character, Snoke, as being the big baddie.
Right.
And then just iced him, in like a second's notice because I guess he wasn't big baddie enough.
He seems to be able to read Kylo Ren's mind, except for the part where he wants to kill him and pulls that off. Right.
Exactly.
Anyways.
Yeah. No, I think there's some very legitimate criticisms of the latest trilogy that, I think make them a lot. They hold up less well than I think even the prequels. In my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of criticism out there for me. And you made this point earlier, which is I'm just happy to be along for the ride. And a lot of times as well. I mean, I think it's great that we got more Star Wars and, we could get into talking about most of the stuff that's in these series, Mandalorian and stuff, that's mostly done in sound stages and CGI. And there's a little bit of footage here and there that's taken from real places on the planet. But I think it's cool that we get more Star Wars. And maybe, I'm not so hardcore that I'm not of the, like, you've ruined my childhood camp, my childhood does not feel compromised at all by any of these newer films. And I'm down with Rey and Finn and these characters, I think they're cool. And so again, not a Star Wars podcast, but when you're talking about popular culture, we had to go there, right? We get to, we're running this, so we get to make a little commentary. But listener, I hope that you did appreciate learning something about the actual locations that were used either, extensively with actors or even as just backdrops over the last couple of our own episodes. And this was a little something different for us on this podcast and was kind of fun. And maybe we can think about other ways to tie together really important moments in popular culture to geographies that happen on the actual planet.
Yeah, I mean, just recapping the this episode and last episode, the locations that they've shot at have spanned almost the entire globe. I think the only continent that they really didn't go to, it feels like, was probably the Oceania region of the world, right?
I think that's correct.
Yeah, it's because they had a little bit in Asia in Thailand.
Yep.
Tunisia, obviously, constantly going back to that location for Tatooine. Although I guess Southwest Asia with the United Arab Emirates.
Right.
So I guess technically, there was two locations in Asia. So a couple of them. And then obviously Guatemala and Bolivia. Like it's just like and then in Europe and for Hoth and everything.
California.
Like there's been a lot of places that Star Wars has created out of our world to create these really fantastic sort of aliens sort of worlds, right? And that's kind of amazing to think about, sort of just the geography of that and how it all works. And we use sort of Star Wars as an example, but we could have done this with Indiana Jones. We could have done this with a lot of different films. We could have done it with Game of Thrones if we wanted to. And maybe
if we wanted to talk about Oceania and filming, we would have spent time talking about Lord of the Rings and talked about New Zealand a whole bunch.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's just a really good way to sort of talk about maybe honestly kind of like the geography of Hollywood, Yeah. Because this is sort of the story we're telling. We're just telling it through Star Wars. So yeah, been very, very fun. And I think we're going to have a bonus episode this week, and it's going to be about, I think, my favorite film inside which is not technically part of the Skywalker sort of saga, but which is Rogue One.
Rogue One's an outstanding film.
Yeah. Right. And so we'll rip on that for another like 15 minutes or so. And that'll be a nice little bonus episode that sort of stands aside because it's not technically part of sort of this whole, trilogy. And so with that, Hunter, Pluggables?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. I'm Hunter Shobi. I'm a professor of geography at Portland State University. I'm co-author of Portland is a Cultural Atlas and Upper Left Cities, Cultural Atlas of San Francisco, Portland and Seattle. My co-author there was David Banis. And along with Jeff here, I am the co-host of Geography is Everything podcast that you're presently listening to.
Yeah. Thanks, Hunter. My name is Jeff Gibson. I'm also the co-host of this podcast, Geography is Everything. You can also find me on YouTube. That's youtube.com/loat Geography by Jeff if you want just sort of my more bite-sized videos on sort of geography. If you really liked what you listened to, please go ahead and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. I don't think Spotify has an option, but if it does, do it there. Or whatever podcast app you listen to. We really appreciate seeing those. I really like seeing them. I like to read them. Everybody's very complimentary and just very thankful for that. If you really want to find more of our geography, you want to follow us around more places, please go over to geographyiseverything.substack.com and join that community there. You can subscribe for free and get access to a little bit of extra geography, or you can become a premium subscriber, pay just a little bit of money and get access to quite a bit more geography, including this podcast in a totally ad-free environment. And this will also be where the mini podcast bonus episode lives. So you can listen to that there. And if you are already a premium subscriber, thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate that. If you're already a subscriber, thank you as well. We appreciate having you over there. So
thank you.
Yeah, come on over and join us. It's a good time. I think next time we are going to tackle the geography is Mount Everest, which will be a very interesting, but different kind of episode.
Full return to planet Earth.
We're going to return to planet Earth. In fact, a really, really high point of planet Earth. So we'll be back next week. Until then, see you next time.
Thanks for listening.